Spencer McLaughlin, kind enough to join us now, host Locked On College Football and Locked On Ducks as we get set for this. Spencer, good to see you again, man. Happy holidays, happy New Year. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Ready for college football as always. Good to be on with you guys.
Of course. No, we're excited for it as well here. And listen, we talked to you a lot about the Oregon Ducks. They seem to be in the matchup that a lot of people are most intrigued by this weekend, right? For a lot of these other teams, well-worn path, championship history, teams that we've been used to here. And then there's Oregon with Dante Moore, who's oft talked about for the next level. Texas Tech, who's the newcomer on the scene, pockets lined with cash and a roster that shows up for it. So for you, this Oregon team, I guess big picture, how would you compare this group in terms of where they sit right now on the precipice of their first game for this year's playoff and the team last year that came into the tournament number one and was upended by Ohio State?
They're younger. They're definitely not as much of a veteran-heavy team compared to the roster they had last year. It doesn't mean they aren't playing at a really high level or capable of playing at the same level that they maxed out at last year. Now, unfortunately, they peaked probably in the Big Ten championship game or probably in that game against Ohio State. And Dan Lanning now has to try and push the right buttons to figure out how to get this young team to peak in this spot, which is, to this point, the biggest game of Dan Lanning's career because he hasn't won in this spot, obviously having lost to Ohio State a year ago. So the NFL talent on both sides of the ball is very apparent. Texas Tech is a really good team. I liken this matchup a bit. Do you guys watch Star Wars? Are you guys Star Wars fans?
Did, yeah.
In The Phantom Menace, there's a great lightsaber battle between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. And Darth Maul ends up winning. But if you played that fight out 8 to 10 times, I don't think Qui-Gon's losing every single time. That's what you've got in this one. It's just two really good, well-prepared, really talented football teams that are going at it. And I think you play it 10 times, one team is winning no more than 6. And it's going to come down to execution in key spots in this game. So it's a great opportunity for both programs, of course. I don't think you have any accusations between the two fan bases of, well, you just spend a bunch of money to get here. I think that's pretty quiet between these two sides. Yeah. I don't think there's any misconception about how these teams got here, but they've been adaptive to the modern landscape of college football. And as you guys were talking about college basketball, I was backstage listening and wondering, can LeBron play college basketball? Serious question.
Yeah. How about it?
Who knows? He's never been in college for a minute in his life. Why wouldn't he be able to play?
We could play out one of the hypotheticals that I would always love, which is what's the worst college basketball team we could put LeBron James on at 41 years old and have him win the NCAA tournament. We'll have that coming up sometime this spring on Sports Talk Radio, Dad.
That's really good. All right, so breaking this game down a little more, how do you expect the Oregon offense to attack the third-ranked by yards Texas Tech defense in the country?
Yeah, I think the creativity in the run game is important for Oregon here because this front seven for Texas Tech is as good as any that Oregon has faced all season long. They've gone up against Indiana. They've gone up against Iowa. Washington's front seven, I think, is pretty slept on, just to name a few that they faced this year. And Texas Tech is as good or better than any of those. When you've got Romello Height and David Bailey as bookend players on the defensive line, Jacob Rodriguez is the best individual defensive player in all of college football, regardless of position for my money. I think that Oregon has to be creative because certainly Dante Moore has shown this year. He can drop straight back and carve up a defense and throw the ball, and he's in a great rhythm with a bunch of different weapons, has a lot of different ways he can attack you on the perimeter. But Oregon wants to be balanced. They have been a run-first team when they've been at their best, and they've got a trio of running backs they use in a lot of different ways. And when you've got a front seven as good as Tech's, who gives up less than 70 yards rushing per game on the year, I think you have to get pretty clever and creative with how you get your running backs involved, when you call certain concepts, and how you try to confuse their eyes so that they're not quickly reading and reacting what you're trying to do, to let a guy like Jacob Rodriguez get downhill and make plays in the backfield. So I think that chess match between Will Stein and the Texas Tech defensive staff, a big one to watch in this game. It's my number one key for the Ducks. They've got to be able to run the ball. I don't think they have to go crazy for 250 plus, but I think they've got to at least be in the 150 range.
You mentioned Will Stein. He one of two coordinators on this staff that have made decisions about their future. He's going to go coach Kentucky. Tosh Lupoi going to go coach Cal. Another decision upcoming that I think is really interesting. Dante Moore. You didn't talk about him explicitly in that version of this, but most people's estimation, the second quarterback off the board in the NFL draft, even though we know the recent history of players with as few starts as he has had at the collegiate level, obviously had some during his time at UCLA. What have you heard, and what's the rumblings around the Oregon folks about what they think his decision looks like this spring?
If Oregon wins the national championship, it's going to be really hard to bring him back. Anything short of that, I have a slight lean. I'd put it 6 out of 10 that he comes back in 2026. And I do think the limited number of starts that you mentioned is a component of that. I think the other aspect, though, that frankly is probably going to be stronger for him, for a guy who hasn't played a lot of college football, he has to look at the 2026 roster that Oregon's going to put together and the weapons he's going to have around him. They announced his starting center, Iapani Lalaulu, who was facing an NFL draft decision. He's returning. That's a big piece of this as well. I think Dante Moore is going to have that itch, that competitive spirit to say, man, we were close, we were capable, but it didn't happen last year. And I know we're going to have a team in 2026 that can go win a national championship. That's going to have probably not Kenyon Sadiq, because I don't think you can get him back. That'd be an incredible pull by Oregon if they were to manage that. But you're going to look at a receiving core that's got DeCorian Moore in his second season, Jeremiah McClellan, who's emerged in the second half of this year, a pair of incoming 5-star wide receivers in Gatlin Bear and Jalen Lott, to go with Jamari Johnson, who I think will burst onto the scene as tight end 1 next year for the Ducks, and an offensive line coach in Alik Terry, who has brought together a different collection of guys again and made them a Joe Moore Award finalist. He's done that back-to-back years, and he's just been so good, and the weapons are there. It's just such an appealing offense to come back and play in. I think that if Oregon comes up short of achieving that one goal that has eluded their program, I think Dante Moore comes back, but it does get tougher and tougher to see that every time Mel Kiper. I wish Mel Kiper would go into a cave and disappear for a month as an Oregon guy. Like, can you stop gassing up our guy? Yeah. He just got here. He's just starting to get into the groove, and Mel Kiper's like, oh, #1 overall pick. I'm like, what about Mendoza? What happened? Where'd he go? He's still there.
Yeah. Yeah, they did lose their old coordinator. Now it's both coordinators, by the way. So if in fact he goes to the draft, spinning it to next year, you just mentioned all the talent coming back. Does Oregon have a quarterback in waiting, kind of like Notre Dame did with C.J. Carr, or would they go to and portal it?
I expect them to go to the portal. Austin Novosad, who was actually the quarterback that committed when Dante Moore originally flipped to UCLA back in that class of 2023. It's been reported that he intends to enter the transfer portal when it opens on Friday. We'll see if he follows Will Stein to Kentucky or not. I think that move is an indication that, yes, Dante Moore has a pretty solid likelihood that he comes back for next season, but also that Oregon is going to have an option who's more ready to go than Novosad, who has not started a game in his 3-year college career, whether that's a guy like Sam Leavitt from Arizona State, or I'd be down for Josh Hoover from TCU. I'm a big fan of his. Dylan Raiola from Nebraska expressed interest. I think that was more from his camp than from Oregon's. Sam Leavitt is actually an Oregon native, though. He went to West Linn and began his career at Michigan State and then went to Arizona State. I think he'd be a really good fit in the Oregon system, and maybe he wants to come and play close to home. West Lynn's about a 90-minute drive from Eugene. So I think Novosad's transfer says something good about the prospects of Dante Moore returning, but also indicates under the surface that Oregon feels they're going to be able to get a better option than an unproven guy who's talented, but just hasn't played a lot of football. And they know how good that roster is going to be next year, that they don't want to undergo some growing pains with a young quarterback. So I think they will add a transfer if it's not Dante Moore, but I think I speak for everybody in Eugene and Portland that wears green and yellow. We'd all like Dante Moore to come back.